So sorry. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for your help. We were talking about Hector exhibiting honor, and we ended this section with Hector going to get Paris to return to the war because Paris was just sitting up in his room with his girlfriend, wife, whatever she is, and this battle is going on around him, and people are dying. And since this is a story of honor, we know that, first of all, this war is because of honor. Paris stole Menelaus' wife, so he said, Agamemnon, we've been dishonored. We've got to go restore our honor. So that started the war. And then Achilles and Agamemnon had an argument in front of the entire army. What was that argument over? A girl. Agamemnon was being asked to return Chryseis, and he said, okay, if I do that, I'm going to get another prize. I'm going to get Briseis, who is the second best girl. And Achilles said, you've dishonored me in front of this entire army, and I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just fighting with you because I like to fight. So he left, and he went home. So he was not willing to die for Agamemnon, even for honor. So I will die for myself, I will die for somebody I love, but I'm not dying for somebody I don't even like. So he left the war. And of course, in your reading, you know that he came back. And this is the scene, this is the battle scene between Hector and Achilles.
Seen this moment, my friends. I'll make a pact with you. The gods as our witnesses. Let us pledge that the winner will allow the loser all the proper funeral rituals. There are no paths between the lines. Now you know who you're fighting.
I don't think it wants to sustain costs. It's not just go home, get back to bed, enjoy your day.
You're right ahead. You got a test on Tuesday, so
Right.
the door's not locked. You can leave anytime you like. Is this buffering? Is it quit? What should I do? So just wait a minute. Is it because it's raining?
No.
Yeah.
Only you. Someone else like that.
Yeah, I can't though. I gotta have all. I can't go to YouTube. Okay.
No, it's that
It's supposed to be from YouTube. What? Why is it not letting us go to YouTube? Okay. Yeah. All right, let's see. Hector? Okay, y'all, I hate this, but we're not going to see the best war scene ever, it looks like. And it is a good scene. It's not the right scene. I hate you. Sorry about this. It's still buffering, so it's...
Copy that URL.
Copy this one?
No, one right above the video.
Oh, okay.
I like it.
Maybe you need to pause it.
Okay, well, you can find it yourself, I guess. I'm so sorry. I really, really want you to see this, but too bad. We're not going to.
We're not cool.
We're not. We're just not. Let's see. Oh, well. What I wanted to show you was that Achilles does kill Hector. You know that, and I could turn the lights on. And then his honor is restored at the end. So we'll just look at the book and take up where we were on Tuesday. And that would be on page 132. All right, book 6. Achilles had left the war, and Hector had returned home, and he had been tempted 3 times, and we see what an honorable character he is. In book 8, the Trojans do actually start winning. Remember, that was the deal that Thetis made with Zeus. Achilles went crying to her and said, he dishonored me, he hurt my feelings and made me look bad in front of everybody. So his mom went to Zeus and asked him to make the Trojans win. Now, he knew it was going to cause trouble for him. Why? Because Hera and Athena hated the Trojans. Why did they hate them? Because Paris didn't pick them. So he knew, and of course it did. It caused all kind of problems. And in book 8, he actually did make the Trojans start winning. And in book 9, which starts on page 132, we see where Nestor takes the floor and he says, look, we're losing, it's looking really bad for us. We've got to get Achilles to come back. So they made a group, they got a group of people, 3 people, to go get Achilles to come back. Who were the 3 that went to get Achilles on page 136? Odysseus, who was the cleverest of the Greeks. That's Odysseus. Ajax, who was a good fighter. And his teacher, Phoenix. Phoenix was his mentor, his teacher. So the 3 of them were sent by the war council to try to get Achilles to return to war. And the first one to speak was Odysseus. He was the cleverest of the Greeks, and he was a good speaker. And he said, Achilles, we are in bad trouble without you. We are losing. Things are not looking good at all. On page 138, he gives him 3 appeals. He makes 3 arguments to Achilles. He gives him a moral argument, first of all. He said, it's on your head if we lose. You are the best fighter of all, of the Greeks or the Trojans. And if you come back, we'll win, no doubt. But if you don't, it's all on your head. All these deaths and everything else, it's on you. And then he gives him a material argument. He says, Agamemnon's going to give you all this stuff if you come back. He's going to give you racehorses, beautiful women. He's going to give you Briseis back. He's even going to give you one of his daughters. And then on page 139, he gives him a patriotic argument. He says, they will honor you like a god. You got to come back. And he says, no, I am not going to risk dying for Agamemnon. I can't stand him. You can forget it. He can't buy me, and he's not going to persuade me. Nothing, he says, nothing is worth my life to do for him. And on page 141, turn to page 141, he tells them this, and this is a passage that will be on your test, beginning on line 423, page 141, line 423. He says, my mother Thetis, a moving silver grace, tells me 2 fates sweep me on my death. If I stay here and fight, I'll never return home, but my glory will be undying forever. If I return home to my dear fatherland, my glory is lost, but my life will be long. What is Achilles saying there? Yeah, he's got to make a decision here. And as far as I know, Achilles is the only mortal ever to be able to choose his fate. But he said, I have 2 fates. I can stay here and win glory by fighting, but I'm going to die. Or I can go home and live a long life, but I won't have any glory. What's the significance of that to this overall piece?
Better to die in battle, have glory.
One of the themes of this story is honor. Another one is destiny or fate. And when a man's destiny has been decided, it can't be changed. The gods can't change it. A man can't change it. It cannot be changed. So he said, I have 2 destinies, and I can choose, which is very highly unusual. And one of his destinies involves dying for honor, achieving eternal honor and glory. And he's got to make that decision. And we know that honor is important to this culture, so we know that he eventually will end up dying for honor. But he doesn't want to do it for Agamemnon. And then on page 143, his teacher Phoenix speaks to him. And he gives him this really long story about this guy who was in battle one time, and he had a choice about whether he was going to enter the battle or not. And in the end, he fought, and he got nothing. And Phoenix said, don't let that be you. You can get all this stuff if you return to the battle. Don't wait until you have to come back. And he says, no, I'm not going to fight for Agamemnon. He said, you are my teacher. I do love you. And I do respect you and value what you have to say, but I'm not doing it for Agamemnon. Then on page 146, Ajax, who is a fighter, stands up and gives the shortest speech of all. Now you know that during the time of the Greeks, women were not valued at all. They were about the same as having a good dog. You've got a good dog and a good woman, you're set. But they were not equal at all to men. And on page 146, Ajax gets up and says, all this is because of a girl? You're not going to fight because of a girl? And he says, no, I'm not. He said, I'm not going to fight. I'm going to fight. I'm going to return to this war when Hector comes all the way down to my ship and I can kill him. That's when I'm going back to battle. And they said, okay. Well, he has this companion, his beloved companion, Patroclus. And Patroclus has been raised with Achilles to fight. He's a great warrior too. And he says, Achilles, I know that you've got honor at stake here, and I know you don't want to go back, but I do. And Achilles says, okay, you can wear my armor, and you can go back, but I want you not to do two things. What were the two things he asked him not to do? Do not fight Hector. And don't go back to Troy. Stay down here and fight. Don't go all the way back up there. Well, of course, he did. And on page 148, we see this war. And we see this guy named Sarpedon on page 148, and he's fighting, and he's about to get killed. And Zeus is watching this. And on line 471, Zeus says, fate has it that Sarpedon, whom I love more than any man, is to be killed by Patroclus. Shall I take him out of battle while he still lives and set him down in the rich land of Lycia, or shall I let him die under Patroclus's hands? And Athena looks at him, or Hera, and says, are you crazy? She says, you can't change his fate. You can change the circumstances, but you can't change his fate. It's going to happen. And if you start messing with stuff like that, all the other gods and goddesses are going to try it. And can you imagine what kind of trouble this is going to start? So then he says, you're right, I'm just going to let him fight. So Patroclus does kill him. And when he's killing him, he calls out to Glaucus. Sarpedon calls out to Glaucus. Remember when we saw him and Diomedes fight in the, or they didn't fight in the center of the battle one time. But he calls out for Glaucus and he says, get my body. Now that was a big deal. Because when someone died, of course, his family and his comrades wanted to give him a proper burial. And one of the parts of that proper burial was that they had to take the body, clean it up, they had to put coins on the eyes so that when the person went to the underworld, he could pay the boatman to go into the underworld. Now, everybody who died went to the underworld. Only the gods lived in heaven. So if they didn't have money to pay the boatman to cross the river to the underworld, they would wander the shore and they would be restless forever. So you didn't want that for your family member, so you wanted to be sure to get the body. Well, of course, the other side wanted to keep the body because they wanted to drag it around and mutilate it and let the dogs eat it so that their enemies would wander around forever and not rest. So Sarpedon's calling out, Glaucus, please get my body. Well, Glaucus had been injured, and he prayed to Apollo, man, I'm hurt, I don't know if I can go get his body, and Apollo healed him. And on page 151, he went to get the body, and they're pulling back and forth, and they actually do end up, the Trojans do end up with his corpse. And then, of course, they're going back to Troy, and Patroclus chases them. And he's chasing Hector's chariot. And on page 155, he throws a stone and hits the chariot driver. And on line 772, it describes that scene. The sharp stone caught him right in the forehead, smashing his brows together and shattering the skull so that his eyeballs spurted out and dropped into the dirt before his feet. Now, Homer didn't include this just to make us go, ooh, that's gross. He included it because he wants us to see how graphic and violent war actually is. You know, that saying, war is hell, he wants to show it right here. I mean, this guy's smashing, his eyeballs pop out of his head. And he glorifies war because that's how people get honor. But he wants us also to realize there's a cost to it. On page 156, Patroclus is closing in on Hector, and Apollo comes up behind him and punches him in the back and knocks the breath out of him. Have you ever had the breath knocked out of you? You know, it kind of disables you. You can't do anything. So when his breath is knocked out of him, on page 157, one of the Trojans slipped up behind him and put his spear through a boy named Euphorbus. So Patroclus, this great warrior, has been hit in the back by the god Apollo, and his breath is knocked out. And this little kid comes up behind him and spears him. So then, of course, he's facing Hector with all this stuff happening to him, and Hector rammed his spearhead into the pit of his belly and threw all the way through, and Patroclus fell heavily. He killed Patroclus. And you could hear the Greeks wince. The Greeks were horrified that Hector had killed Patroclus. He was Achilles' beloved companion, and he was a great warrior, and now he was dead. So, of course, they're fighting over his body. And the Greeks do get his body, but what does Hector get? Hector gets his armor and carries it back with him. So then they carry Patroclus' body back, and Achilles mourns him, and he's sitting there just wailing, crying. And his mother comes to him, and she says, "Why are you crying now? You got what you want. The Trojans are winning." And he said, "Yeah, but look what it cost me. I lost my best friend, my beloved companion, Patroclus. If I had been in that war, he wouldn't have died." And she says, "I've got to go back." And his mother says, "You know what's going to happen if you go back." And he says, "I know, but I've got to. I've got to find the man who destroyed my beloved, Hector." And he says, "I've got to win glory, and I'm going." And his mama says, "Well, that's good, but you ain't got no armor. Hector got your armor when he killed Patroclus, so I've got to go get you some more." And he says, "Okay." And she says, "Do not return to battle until I go get you some armor." And of course he complies with that. And on page 164, he's letting the Greeks and the Trojans know that he's coming back. And on line 252 it says, "He yelled, and behind him Pallas Athena amplified his voice, and shock waves reverberated through the Trojan ranks." It's like a rebel yell. He's just screaming. And the sun's setting behind him, and it's like his head's on fire, and everybody's really scared. The Trojans are really frightened. And this guy named Polydamas said, "Okay, y'all, this is not a good thing. We need to go back to Troy, regroup, and get ready to fight this huge battle." And Hector's furious at him. He said, "We're winning. We've got the momentum. Why would we want to go back to Troy? No, we're going to stay here and fight." And on page 166, the Trojans agreed with him. And on line 330, "Thus Hector and the Trojans cheered, the fools, their wits dulled by Pallas Athena." And that's foreshadowing. The fools, they're going to stay there and fight, and they're going to lose because Achilles is returning. So Achilles is cleaning up Patroclus. In the meantime, his mom has gone to get his armor. And she goes to this guy named Hephaestus. And in the Roman mythology, he is the god Vulcan. So he's the god of smithing and... Why is this not working? Nothing is working on this thing today. Okay. He's the god of smithing and iron. And Thetis goes to him and she says, "You owe me a favor. You remember when you were in heaven?" He's married to Aphrodite. "Remember when you were born, you were crippled, and they threw you out of heaven because they didn't want to cripple God?" She said, "And I took care of you and nurtured you and took you back to heaven?" And he said, "Yeah." And she says, "Well, now I need you to help me." And he says, "Okay, what you need?" And she said, "I need some armor for my boy." So he makes him some. And it's a, come on. I wish I had a sledgehammer. I would smack this. It's running so slow. No. Okay. Well, here we go. All right. He made him this armor, and he made him a shield, and the shield had seven concentric circles like this. And each of the circles had meanings, and we're going to talk about that. On page 170, Homer describes the shield. And on the very outside, this outside part here, he made the earth and the sky and the oceans, which the Greeks thought that was it. The sky was the top, the oceans were the bottom, and that was the beginning and the end. And that was what was on the outside. And then on page 170, it gives a description of the inside. On it, he made 2 cities, peopled and beautiful. Weddings in one, festivals, brides led from their rooms by torchlight, up through the town, bridal song rising, young men reeling in dance to the tune of lyres and flutes, and the women standing in their doorways admiring them. Then on page 171, around the other city, 2 armies of glittering soldiery were encamped. Their leaders were at odds. Should they move in for the kill or settle for a division of all the lovely wealth the citadel held fast? The citizens wouldn't surrender and armed for an ambush. Their wives and little children were stationed on the wall, and with the old men held it against attack. Okay, so we've got this city on one end that has this wedding with people singing and dancing and playing music and beautiful scene. Then on the other city, at the other end, we have soldiers camped out to make war. What is the contrast here? What is he saying here with this contrast? What do weddings usually indicate or signify or symbolize? I hear lots of little answers, but I don't hear any big ones yet. Speak up. Happiness, joy, a new beginning, love, positive. A coming together. What does a war represent? Death, destruction, sorrow, the opposite. So what he's done, he's juxtaposed these 2 sides of life. There is this joy side to just the regular, normal, everyday life that people lead, and then there's the side of war. And it's not pretty, but that's how they win their honor. So even though it's not a good, or I don't want to say it's not a good thing, although it can be destructive and bring sorrow, it's how they get their honor. So it's a part of life. And then he goes on to describe the other circles inside as we get closer. There's farmland on one, there's a vineyard, cattle, pasture, everything that makes regular life. And of course that's what most people want to do. They want to have a regular life and just raise their families and be happy. But life is not always like that. And the part of it that is not pleasant is what gives them their glory. And of course this is a story of a man and his glory and honor. On page 173 we see the death of Hector. And we see that Achilles is chasing them back and everybody's gone inside but Hector. And on page 175 we see everybody in the city standing at the walls. We saw that in the 1 second of the video that we got to see. And they're watching Hector. And they're saying, "Come in, Hector, save yourself." And he says, "I can't do it. I cannot come in." On page 176, He says, I can't face the Trojan men and women now. I can't have them calling me a coward. I can't have them saying that I lost the battle. And he says, you know what? I'm going to cut a deal with Achilles. If he comes, I'm going to say, you know what? Let's have a truce, and we'll give back all your stuff. We'll give back Helen. We'll call a truce. And he said, nah, he's not going to do that. I guess I'll fight him. So what does he do when he sees Achilles coming? He runs. He runs around the city 3 times. And on page 178, again, Zeus is watching this. And he says, I do not like what I see, a man close to my heart, chased down around Troy's wall. Hector has burned many an ox's thigh to me, both on Ida's peaks and in the city's high holy places. And now Achilles is running him down around Priam's town. Thank you now, gods, and take counsel whether we should save him from death or deliver him into Achilles' hands, good man though he is. So again, he's trying to say, I'm going to change this man's fate. And Athena says, oh no, you can't do that. You can change the circumstances, but a man's fate can't be changed. And if you start messing with the circumstances, all the other gods and goddesses are going to do the same. So he says, let happen what's going to happen. So Achilles chases him around 3 times, and then he stops. And on page 180, Hector says, let's make a deal. If you kill me, you'll give my body back to my people. If I kill you, I'll give your body back. And Achilles says, no, I'm not going to make any deal with you. Shut up and fight. So that's what they do. And on page 181, at the bottom of the page, let's see, like line 351. A gleam in the air as Achilles poised his spear with murderous aim at Hector, eyes boring into the beautiful skin, searching for the weak spot. How do you know where the weak spot was? It's his armor. He's got on Achilles' armor, so of course he knows. Hector's body was encased in the glowing bronze armor he had stripped from the fallen Patroclus. But where the collarbone joined at the neck, the gullet offered swift and certain death. It was there Achilles drove his spear through, as Hector charged. The heavy bronze apex pierced the soft neck, but did not slit the windpipe, so that Hector could speak still. So he stabbed him, and he's lying down, and he's saying, please return my body. And Hector said, Achilles said, no, I'm not. I'm going to drag your body around, mutilate it, and let the dogs eat what's left. I'm not giving your body back. And then on page 182, line 395, so this is Achilles. There was no way to persuade you. Your heart is a lump of iron. But the gods will not forget this, and I will have my vengeance on that day when Paris and Apollo destroy you in the long shadow of Troy's western gate. So he dies. And then all the soldiers come up there and take turns stabbing him. And then Achilles gets his body and ties it behind his chariot and drags him off. And every day he gets his body out. He gets Hector's body out and drags it and mutilates it. And every day Apollo restores it and renews it. And on page 187, the gods are looking down. After about 2 weeks of that, Apollo finally says, okay, get a hold of yourselves, gods. He says, has Hector never burned for you thighs and bulls and goats? Of course he has. But now you cannot bring yourselves to save even his bare corpse, to return to his mother and his wife and his boy. And the gods agree, yeah, we really should make Achilles send him back. So on page 189, Zeus tells Thetis, go tell your boy to give that body back. This is ridiculous. Enough's enough. But in the meantime, Priam decides he's going to go and ask for the body back. And he does. And he goes to camp, to Achilles' camp. And on page 198, he goes in. And you remember when Thetis went to him and asked him for the favor, she put her hand on his knee, her left hand on his knee, and her hand under his chin, on his face. That was the supplicant position. That's what Priam does when he goes to see Achilles. And he even kisses his hands. And Achilles says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Priam." And he says on page 198, "Remember your father, Achilles. Think about how your dad's going to feel when you die." On page 199, at the very top of the page, he spoke, and sorrow for his own father welled up in Achilles. He took Priam's hand and gently pushed the old man away. The two of them remembered. Priam, huddled in grief at Achilles' feet, cried and moaned softly for his man-slain Hector. And Achilles cried for his father and for Patroclus. The sound filled the room. So again, Homer is using this very poignant scene. You remember in the part that we read for Tuesday, he had Hector and Andromache and the baby in the room, and they were laughing and enjoying a few minutes together. Well, so that we would know, we would see the softer, the happier side of this story. Well, he's showing us here the vulnerability even of great heroes like Priam and Achilles. They are both crying. Priam is mourning the loss of his son, and Achilles is thinking about Patroclus and how his own dad's going to feel when he dies. So he says, "Okay, I'll return the body to you." And he agrees to do that. So Priam leaves. They have a feast, and then, of course, he does return the body. And they had a truce for 12 days while they buried Hector. And on page 205, the very last line of this story says, "That was the funeral of Hector, breaker of horses." And the Iliad ends. Why? Why did it just end like that? What's the theme of this story? Honor. So what happened at the end? Who was honored? Hector was honored, and whose honor was restored? Achilles. He had gone back to the war to avenge Patroclus' death. He honored his friend by going back and killing Hector. And then he returned Hector's body to his father. So his honor was restored. And this was a story about honor. That was all he had to say about it. It's been restored. This is a story of two honorable men. And that's how it ends. All right? Who were the characters in this story that showed honor? All right, tell me how they did. Tell me about Achilles, and then tell me about Hector. Okay, Achilles returned to the battle. He'd been dishonored by Agamemnon. Agamemnon kind of pulled rank on him, and he said, "You know what? I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not going to die for you." So he left. He'd been dishonored. But then he returned to kill the killer of Patroclus. He wanted to avenge Patroclus' death, so he returned to the war to do that. All right, that's one way his honor was restored. How else? Yeah, he gave Hector's body back to his dad so that his dad could put the coins on it and his body could rest. How did Hector show honor? Yeah. He returned to the war. He was a prince. He didn't have to fight on the front lines, but he said his being there moralized the troops. So his returning to battle, in spite of all the temptations he had, showed us what an honorable man he was, because he could have sat back there like Paris was, but he chose not to. He chose to return to the war with his men. He felt it was his duty to do that. All right. Do you have any questions about? Do you want to say yes? Okay, so that. Have any questions about any part of that? No. I don't want to name it. I just want to close it. This
You
thing,
got bestowed.
I'm trying to.
Oh, okay.
This thing is difficult. Okay. So now I want to end this.